Okay, we're back again, and we're going to, in this particular podcast, on this note, we were talking about the United States and Africa Summit today, and we were quite lengthy with it, somewhat. And I just wanted to give you a bit more information on the United States. Some people would say United Snakes, but I'm not going to do that. Although I could, I'm going to give you a bit more information, as I mentioned, and we're going to end this particular podcast with this subject matter on this note. And I had already mentioned some things earlier to you, to our listening audience, on how critical this really is in regards to how that all of these European nations are galvanizing around the continent. I'm getting tongue-tied here. I don't understand. But they're galvanizing around the continent for resources, obviously. And who's going to be the bigger player? It's almost like, think about growing up and you were a youngster, or you had something that all the other kids wanted. And so all of the kids were running around you and vying for your attention, and even some got into fights over, I want to play with this new toy, and I want access to his new invention, or I want access to his new what his mom got for him, or where he came from, and so this is actually relevant, but on a much larger scale. The individual nations that are vying, who is going to actually, excuse me, I was eating some soup earlier, and I had to put it aside for a moment because you're more important, okay, because I can have my soup later, okay. And I think I just swallowed a peppercorn, but I'm okay because it was broken down. So anyways, right now it seems as though China is the biggest player because, excuse me, obviously they invested more. A swallow of juice there. They've invested more. So they would have, so to speak, be sitting shotgun. But this is one of the things that's kind of disturbing to me now. The Security Council, United Nations Security Council, as I was mentioning earlier, and I wanted to be clear. And so actually that's why I came back, and I wanted to, when I give information, I want to be clear on, the information that I'm giving. Okay, so now, the council is composed of 15 members. Okay, now these 15 members, you have to look at permanent and non-permanent members. The 5 permanent members on the United Nations Security Council is China, France, Russia, Russian Federation, the United Kingdom, and of course the United States. And 10 non-permanent members elected for 2-year terms by the General Assembly with end of term year is Albania, Brazil, Gabon, Ghana, India, Ireland, Kenya, Mexico, Norway, and the United Arab Emirates. Now, those are the non-member states. Those are the non-member states. Okay, so now think about this. Those are the non-member states. But yet, as I mentioned before, the United States and these five member nations. So why is Russia a permanent member? Why is China? I did say China, right? I did. Why is China, France? So France is an ally of the United States, right? And the United Kingdom is an ally of the United States. Russia's not. And I don't think China is. Why is China and Russia permanent members? Do the math. I would say politically, the reason why they're permanent members is because these are the nations that the United States has to watch. So you know what they say, right? You know what they say, keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. You understand what I'm saying? And so United States, of course, has a vested interest, and all probably as all do nations do, politically, when it comes to how far advanced and the potential threats that other countries can pose, to your, your political and military and economic apparatus. Okay, so they have to watch Russia. They have to gauge Russia's movements. They have to gauge China's movements. They have to gauge Russia and China's rhetoric, and so how best do you do that? You do that because a lot of these nations are professionals when it comes to covert lingo, and they're trained in what to say and what not to say. Okay, as is those from the United States. When they start to use political jargon, they're trained in how to unveil certain things and not to unveil certain things. Okay, and so again, the United States has to keep close ties or close watch on, the Russian Federation and China. So think about the 10 non-member states that are not a part of the United States Security Council. Albania, they ain't no threat to the United States. Brazil, of course not. Gabon, of course not. Ghana, no military threat. India, no military threat, although India is building up. So don't get it twisted. Okay, Kenya, really no threat militarily. Mexico, really no threat. Oh, Norway, no threat. United Arab Emirates, really no threat. But they hold key roles whether they're members or not, because as you already know, the United States is always negotiating with the Arab Emirates states, because they have a vast amount, OPEC and so forth, amount of oil. So at the same time, the United States is not trying to offend United Emirates. They're not trying to ruffle no feathers with the United Arab Emirates. Okay, so I wanted to come on and give you some of that, but I'm going to read a little bit more, and we're not going to be long. But it's just amazing to me. And I heard George Bush speak earlier today, and he's stumbling over some of his words, as we all do sometimes. And there are applause and so forth, and he kind of laid out, what the United States are going to be, the billions that United States are going to spend with the continent. But that remains to be seen, because they've had supposedly agreements When Obama was in office, same with Bush. And nothing really got done, or very little got done. Okay, very little got done. So think about this also. Think about this also. I know I repeat myself sometimes. That's kind of a habit because I want you to get it. That is Russia and China. Just think about if, in fact, Russia and China begin to erect military bases in the continent. That would be a big problem. Y'all know that, right? Because as of right now, the United States, I don't know how many, they have some military bases in Africa, which I can't even understand. But yeah, but again, I can. Again, I can. Understand, overstand. Why the African nations will allow the U.S. to put military bases right on the continent. So if the UN and the European nations, NATO or whoever, they wanted to bully the African nations and just come in and gangster them, it would be a big problem. But with China and Russia on the side of the continent, I don't think the United States would want to do that. It wouldn't be a good strategic move because they've gained the confidence of Russia and China. And it's almost like, it's really not almost like, it is. They have to protect their interests as well because they have invested heavily in the continent. That makes sense to you? I think it does. So let's look at it a little bit more and okay. Okay, so there were 5 big quotes from foreign ministers' powerful speech at the UN, and I'll just peruse over a little bit of that. India yesterday called for sweeping reforms in the United Nations and said decisions about the future of member states from Latin America, Africa, Asia, and small island developing states can no longer be taken without their participation. Okay, listen to that. This is what India said. They called for a sweeping reforms in the United Nations. It said decisions about the future of member states from Latin America, Africa, Asia, and small island developing states can no longer be taken without their participation. So India had went through a time with Britain too, the UK, where they was exploited by the UK, over 100 years ago or so. And so a lot of these nations are definitely coalescing with these other dark continents, such as India and Africa, because they've been through the same thing. They understand what these European nations had stood for, in the colonial era and what they were about. And all of these institutions were formed off of the backs of these continents. Here are 5 big remarks by the foreign minister at the UN. While the debate on reforms has meandered aimlessly, meandered aimlessly, the real world, meanwhile, has changed dramatically. We see that in terms of economic prosperity, technology capabilities, political influence, and developmental progress. During the COVID-19 pandemic, many vulnerable nations of the global south got their first vaccines from beyond their traditional sources. Indeed, the diversification of the global production was itself a recognition of how much the old order had changed. The knock-on effects of conflict situations have also underscored the necessity for a more broad-based global governance. Recent concerns over food, fertilizer, and fuel security were not adequately articulated in the highest councils of decision making. Much of the world was therefore led to believe that their interests did not matter. We cannot let that happen again. When it comes to climate action and climate justice, the state of affairs is no better. Instead of addressing the relevant issues in the appropriate form, we have seen attempts at distraction and diversion on the challenge of terrorism, even as the world is coming together with a more collective response. Multilateral platforms are being misused to justify and protect perpetrators. And lastly, we not only need to increase stakeholdership, but also enhance the effectiveness and credibility of multilateralism in the eyes of the international community and in the eyes of global public opinion. If this is to happen, member states from Latin America, Africa, Asia, and the small island developing states should have credible and continuing representation in the Security Council. Decisions about their future can no longer be taken without their participation. So in other words, being a non-member of the UN Security Council, your voice is very limited. And so these nations, as I just read, are more or less demanding inclusion in the decision making on the Security Council because, in fact, these areas of concern that are affecting them are global issues. They're global issues such as climate change, food security, healthcare, these diseases with all of these variants popping up all over the place. So these are concerns that need to be addressed and consecutively as well with the aid and so forth that is being supported by other countries in regards to, how fast the responses are in terms of getting things to these different nations when they are crisis. A lot of times what happens, these nations that were just mentioned are the last one on the list to get responses or to get what they need. See, but what is happening as a result of that too is that when the COVID pandemic was at its height, the African nations told the United States, they said, just give us because they weren't really trusting. A lot of the nations were really not trusting the United States to just send them the vaccine. They said, give us the blueprint, or give us what am I trying to say here? Give us the blueprint, or give us the outlay of what you did. We'll make our own vaccines. We'll do it ourselves. We'll take it a step further, because there were African nations that were saying, just don't send us these boxes and kits of medicine or vaccines that you guys have already concocted up or whatever you did. We don't trust that. Give us the blue. We can do it ourselves, and we'll take it from there. But the United States did not want to do that, and I don't know. I don't know whether or not eventually they went ahead and did it. But these are some of the concerns that these nations have, and rightfully so. Because with the history and the track record of the United States and these other European countries, it has not always been in the best interest of these countries. And so this is what is going on. And so again, I'm going to read a little bit more and we're going to be done. Let's see. Because again, President Bush, not Bush, what am I saying? President Biden today had words for, obviously, because of course they had 49 nations there today. Give me one sec. Okay. Okay, it says 3 reasons that should be paid to, that attention should be given to the White House summit with African leaders. Okay. The last time the leaders of the African continent were invited to the White House was during Barack Obama's administration. It was in August 2014. Vladimir Putin had just invaded Ukraine for the first time. The world was grappling with a deadly virus, Ebola, and Joe Biden was vice president of the United States. Now, Biden is president, and he has invited leaders of 49 African countries to the White House for the first time since the Obama summit. 5 countries did not receive invitations, and I wonder why. 5 countries did not receive invitations, and those countries are, let me give you those countries. Okay, and his administration is hosting a summit this week that brings together, as I mentioned, the 49 leaders of the African countries, a 3-day summit in the Washington, D.C. area, which I believe tomorrow is actually the last day. Okay, now these are the countries that were not invited. The ruling government in Guinea was seized by a military junta in September 21 and is now led by Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya, if I'm saying his name right. The military junta overthrew President Alpha Conde, who had won a controversial 3rd term for office despite term limits, which he claimed did not apply to him. See, so we still have problems with some of these African countries who are not on board. Now, the Sudan is another country that was not invited. Sudanese General Abdel Fattah toppled the government in October 2021, taking power during the Northeast African nation's transition to a democracy after 3 decades of authoritarian rule. Okay, so Mali is another one. Okay, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Eritrea. The U.S. does not have formal ties with Eritrea, a country located in the Horn of Africa in the eastern region of the continent, so the nation's leaders were not invited. Okay, it's more to it than that, though. Now, Burkina Faso, located in West Africa, is in a dire humanitarian situation after suffering from two coups in less than 9 months. Troops in September ousted the ruling military leader. Okay, and then of course Mali. Um, okay, and Mali just recently they ran France out. Mali also recently rejected help from France humanitarian groups, affecting hundreds of thousands of Malians who are in need of emergency food and medical assistance. So you see what's going on here. Um, Now, France France is responsible for the devastation in Mali and 13 other nations in the continent, which, as I mentioned earlier, where they extract like $500 billion a year out of those 14 nations. And there has been, as of date, no remedy to make these countries solvent, or to the lesser degree, you know, which they should be self-sufficient. But of course, because of the things that France has done, and so there needs to be restructuring. Okay, okay, just one sec. So there's still work to be done. See, because obviously you have some African nations who are not on board with dealing with a lot of these European countries because they know how they are, and then of course you have the larger majority who are trying to get things done and trying to work things out to the interests of their people and the best. So prayerfully they'll get it done, and there'll be real change, so that's all I wanted to say. I just wanted to come and give you, some, as it were, some closing. I don't know if I want to call it closing arguments or, but there has to be real change. It really does. There has to be real change because, okay, it says here, and I'm going to read some of this and I'll be finished. It says here, at the same time, Biden wants to avoid the condescending tone that has marked relations between African nations in the West, which first colonized the continent, then worked to suppress and undermine popular revolutionary movement thereafter World War II. We are very conscious again of the Cold War history of the Cold War history. And Biden, I guess he was, the deleterious impact on colonialism on Africa. And we studiously seek to avoid repeating some of the mistakes of those earlier eras. Molly Fee, a State Department Assistant Secretary for African Affairs, told reporters, during a briefing. The summit, which began earlier this week and ends tonight, comes at a time when domestic concerns continue to dominate American public discourse, with only the war in Ukraine and protests in China managing to garner widespread attention when it comes to foreign affairs. Ignoring Africa is a mistake, however. Of course, they know that. The Biden administration believes the summit is really rooted in the recognition that Africa is a key geopolitical player and one that is shaping our present and will shape our future, obviously. And it goes on to say, Senior Fisher said last week, the continent is booming because now they have car manufacturers there. They have all of these investors such as Visa, General Electric. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. Who see Africa as a international hub for commerce and prosperity, and of course infrastructure and all those other things. So, if the business of America is, as the saying goes, doing business, then closer relationships with Africa makes perfect business sense. The pandemic did not damage African economies the way it did those in East Asia, Europe, and North America. In fact, the continent is experiencing unprecedented economic growth. But of course, it has to continue. Okay, the economic expansion is bound to continue. The consumption that drives global prosperity after 2030 will take place outside the West, Moore told Yahoo News. Africa makes sense for the United States, he said in a telephone interview. African leaders, however, want investment, not aid, Moore cautioned. In other words, they want to escape the model that guided Africa's policy for much of the 20th century, which focused on helping people out of poverty and later fighting the devastation caused by HIV/AIDS, which they brought. Yeah, which they brought. Today, countries including Ghana, Ethiopia, the Ivory Coast, Senegal, represent some of the fastest growing economies in the world when measured by the year-by-year rise in gross domestic product. Okay, and like I said, we can visit this again some other time because there's so much actually to give you. I want to keep you abreast of what is actually happening and the growth that is actually taking place, and it's gonna blow your mind. See, because like I said, all roads lead back to the continent, and by 2050, they say let's do before 2050. By 2030. They say the GDP of the continent will be something like, close to, 4 or 5 trillion, and we might say that that's small for the continent because they got a late start, as opposed to you talking about the Western countries. But think about it like this: the Western countries. The Western countries are on a decline economically. So to bolster their economies, what do they need? They need the continent, right? But we're gonna continue to see these downtrends for the European nations as there's gonna be a great uptick for the countries in the continent as they could continue to increase their GDP and so forth, and innovation and technology, and with the help of Russia and with the help of China, they say that the continent will be the new superpower. Okay, see, because you can have a whole lot of military power, which the United States does. Okay, but there's really no need to bolster, and to continue to increase, military production because there's no wars, and of course we know that the way the U.S. and other European countries have been, they can create them, which they have over time. But with the world and all of these other sister nations such as India, and China and all these other nations who are not given over to war unless they have to, they're not on no trajectory of war no more. So and so the U.S. obviously it would be a bad strategic move for them to point missiles at other countries who are not trying to have war, especially when you have a coalition of other nations who are back in the continent. That wouldn't be a good move. So anyways, we're going to finish up there, and we're going to bring back this again soon because we want to keep you abreast of what's going on. Click the button. Remember to support us. Go to our Cash App and drop something in there for us. Find us on Amazon, Spreaker, Apple Music, Podbean, and many, many other host sites. So we encourage you to continue to tune in, and we'll be seeing you soon. Have a great night. Be safe. Okay, bye-bye.